Will the courts step in to block President Trump's tariffs? That's the big question heading into a hearing this week in federal court, where judges will decide whether the bulk of Trump's tariffs are legal. Joining us to discuss, Zach Schoenfeld, courts and legal reporter here at The Hill. Hey, Zach, so which tariffs are being challenged here, and what is the basis for the challenge?
Hey, Drew, the challenge here concerns the bulk of the tariffs that we have seen the Trump administration impose over the last 6 months. It includes tariffs dating all the way back to February, including those specific tariffs that Trump put on Canada, Mexico, and China over what he said was an emergency from an influx of fentanyl. But it also includes those Liberation Day tariffs that Trump had originally announced back in April. It's been on pause, and now he's announcing these flurry of trade agreements in the lead up to his August 1st deadline, where he has told countries if they don't negotiate trade deals that they could face very steep tariff rates. So it is most of Trump's tariffs, not quite all of them. He has some other ones, for example, on steel and aluminum that are using different legal authorities and aren't at issue here. But by and large, the tariffs that we've been talking about over the Trump administration are what it's issue here. And this case all turns on whether Trump can invoke an emergency law to pass these tariffs. It's a federal law known as IEEPA, and it gives the president authority to impose economic sanctions when he finds that there is an emergency. The arguments from the plaintiffs here is saying that this law never authorizes tariffs in the first place, but they say even if it does, it doesn't authorize it in this way, and Trump is the emergencies that he's been citing, according to these plaintiffs, aren't real emergencies that allow him to impose these tariffs. So a lot of different arguments from the plaintiffs here, but it really all turns on what is the scope of this emergency law known as IEEPA.
And how broad would this ruling be? Trump just announced a trade deal with the EU that set tariffs at 15%. Would that be negated?
It potentially could. Now, unfortunately, when Trump has been announcing these recent flurry of trade agreements, we've seen some of these announcements come in Truth Social posts and in his public comments to reporters, but we have yet to see some of the fine print on the actual agreements themselves. So there's always, of course, the chance that the administration finds some new legal justification that is not this emergency law called IEEPA. Then it wouldn't be at issue in this lawsuit. But as far as we can tell, based on the limited details that we've heard from the president and top White House officials so far, is that it still follows from that April 2nd Liberation Day announcement and is part of this batch of IEEPA tariffs. So at least as of now, it does seem that depending on what the court does here, that some of these recent trade agreements could be affected.
What do legal experts say about the arguments being made here? Do they think the president is on strong legal ground to enact these tariffs, or do they think that the plaintiffs have a good point in their challenge?
Drew, I think one of the interesting things about this case is this is not a case that's dividing, conservative legal experts on one side and liberal legal experts on the other side. Just take, for example, this particular lawsuit that's going to be going to the appeals court for oral arguments on Thursday morning. The person who will be representing the small businesses who are suing, he himself, this is Neil Katyal, he is an Obama-era Solicitor General, but also this legal team has some conservative backing as well. It's not just liberal groups here. There are some conservative and libertarian interest groups that have gotten involved too. Also, a libertarian law professor, he himself has also gotten involved. So it's not one that really directly falls on those conservative versus liberal legal lines. You're especially seeing in this case, like I said, a lot of conservative and libertarian legal scholars believing that the president is overstepping his authority here. But at the end of the day, it's really going to be up to this appeals court.
So this is before an appellate panel, and eventually, depending on what they rule, is this expected to be something that ends up being decided by the Supreme Court?
A lot of people I've been talking to, both people involved in this case as well as outside observers, a lot of them do expect that this is going to go to the Supreme Court, and that could be the very next step as soon as we get the ruling here from the appeals court. Now, we're not expecting a ruling from the bench on Thursday. They're just going to hear arguments, but we do know that they're hearing it on an expedited schedule. So even if this August 1st deadline goes into effect, it might not be very long before we hear this decision from the Federal Circuit. And as soon as that decision lands, whoever loses could potentially take this case to the Supreme Court as the next step. In fact, they could try to seek emergency relief. The Trump administration has sent some signals that they may do so. And actually, in fact, in another lawsuit challenging Trump's tariffs, it actually is already at the Supreme Court. The plaintiffs in that separate case have actually been asking the justices to go ahead and leapfrog all these lower courts and go ahead and take up this issue of the legality of Trump's tariffs now. Now, the Supreme Court's on its summer recess. We don't expect to hear from them until they come back for their next term in October. But one way or another, a lot of legal experts I've been talking to do expect this to reach the justices.
I want to ask you about what's happening with Alina Haba. She is the acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey. She's been engulfed in turmoil amid a battle between district court judges and the Trump administration over who should lead the office. Haba, it should be noted, represented President Trump during his criminal fraud trial. Now a criminal defendant is questioning Haba's appointment. What's happening there?
Yeah, that's right. You know, Haba has now been engaged in this battle with the district judges in New Jersey. And this started because when Haba was originally placed into that top federal prosecutor role in New Jersey, she was placed there in an interim status. And the way federal law works on this is it gives that appointee a maximum of 120 days. If they want to stay in that interim position, the judges for the relevant court, so here we're talking about the district judges in New Jersey, they have to agree to extend her tenure. So that 120-day clock ran out last week, and in the lead up to that, we saw the judges reject Haba, saying that she could not continue to stay in that interim role indefinitely. So then the judges then appointed someone else to take the role. But now the Trump administration is attempting a workaround. They fired that official who was set to replace Haba and become her successor. And now they have moved Haba. She was the interim U.S. attorney. The Trump administration now claims that she is rightfully in the role of acting U.S. attorney. A slightly different role. Her nomination to the Senate to be in the role permanently has been withdrawn. But this is really creating a messy legal battle, Drew, with now, as you alluded to there in the question, we now have criminal defendants beginning to question the validity of Haba's appointment. So we are expecting actually a hearing to take place this afternoon before a judge to determine the next steps in this case, where a criminal defendant who's facing drug charges has said that Haba has no authority to prosecute him, so his charges have to be dismissed. So still very much an open question here as to whether Haba is going to be able to continue to serve in that top prosecutorial role in New Jersey.
All right, we're running out of time here, but quickly, this is a story that I sympathize with. I wanted to ask you about, there's a federal judge that seems to have been gotten caught using AI. What's happening there?
Yeah, that's right. Some of the parties in this case, it's a biopharma case, not a politically charged case like these other ones we've been talking about. But in that case, we got an opinion from a judge, and we've now heard from the parties who said they looked through that opinion and they said there were multiple cases that were cited where the position was wrong, that the judge said the outcome of that case was erroneous. They also say there were made-up quotes in the judge's ruling. So certainly, no confirmation that this was AI, but certainly has the signs of an AI hallucination there. We do know that the judge has removed that opinion, saying that it was entered in error.
Yikes. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. Zach Schoenfeld, thanks so much for your input. Everybody, if you want to follow Zach's work, go over to thehill.com and subscribe to the Gavel newsletter. You can get it all in your inbox. Zach Schoenfeld, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.